Welcome to Season 1 of Garth and Sue Talk, a new series by Psych Sessions, where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So, please pull up a seat as we talk about teaching. We are back for another conversation. This is Garth with Sue Franz, and today we talk about examinations. So Sue, when I started teaching, I don't know how I got this idea, but my idea was that in psychology classes, you should just have multiple choice exams. That's the best way. Although there was some variation, I suppose, when I was in college to, especially graduate school, but in my undergraduate, there was a little variation where we would write maybe a couple essay questions from time to time. Now, looking back on that, I realize all the various reasons why an instructor may have chosen a multiple choice exam over some alternatives. And we're probably going to have a larger conversation about assessment, I imagine. But yeah, let's start there. Just what do you think about exams? And what do you think about the fact that when I came into this field, that's what I was doing?
It was the same thing I did for 15 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever length of time it was. That's exactly what I did. It was multiple choice exams. Sometimes I would have a couple essay questions, sometimes not. And I wasn't really introduced to any other way of assessing student learning. It was, here's an exam. And my exams were based on the reading of the textbook. And I told students that their textbook was their first source of information, and I was there to supplement the text. So almost all of my questions were based on the textbook, which meant that I made heavy use of the test bank. And I chose the questions from the test bank. They were applied questions. But yeah, multiple choice tests. That's what we do.
Yeah. I think that at some point when I was just trying to keep my head above water as an instructor with all of these students, the multiple choice exam and a Scantron machine seemed like that was like my one piece of control of this is quick and the process is not going to kill me. Whereas, and I think I heard it a little bit in your voice there or in your story, that you could assign an essay, but you're going to spend a lot of time looking at those essays.
Yeah. And then figuring out how to grade those essays.
Well, yeah, I didn't learn that for years later until the AP exam.
You and me both.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. So, were you giving essays right from the beginning? Were you playing with that, you think, right away?
I don't know that I was playing with it right away. I think that at some point I became a little dissatisfied with multiple choice only and thought I should give students another way of showing what it is that they're learning. And I could write more and ask for more detailed, applied kinds of questions with an essay. So yeah, I frequently did, for many years, I did, here's your 50-point unit exam, covers 3 or 4 chapters, and 40 multiple choice questions. And here are 3 essay questions. You student pick which 2 you want to answer. That was pretty standard for me for a while. And then when I couldn't bear reading another essay response, I dumped the essay questions and it was 50 multiple choice questions. Yeah.
I know where we're going. I have an idea of where we're going, where we both have gone and are going in this conversation. But just to back up a little bit, I remember going through those test banks for multiple choice testing, and I remember telling my students, hey, you're responsible for the whole chapter. We're not going to cover it all in this class because I don't have time to cover all of it, but you're responsible for it. So I'd have them on their own read, I put that in quotations, I'd assign the reading to them, and I would assign thoughtfully, like, well, these are the things that I think students will get easier. What I found, of course, is that students weren't reading things that, that we weren't taught. They just weren't reading, let's be honest. So in many cases, so that strategy never worked for me for the exam, because then I'd pull questions from the entire area. So if it was, learning or something like that, I would pull questions from the entire area, and then students would say, well, you never taught us this. And then it left me in this weird place of, what should we expect students to be able to do themselves versus what's responsible to ask them or to assess them on that we haven't talked about. Do you remember that challenge, and how did you think about it at the time?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a perennial question, right? So for at least a century and a half, instructors have been trying to figure out, how do I get my students to do the reading? And you don't have to look on the STP Facebook page. You probably don't have to go very deep before you got that topic coming up yet again. How do I get my students to read? Well, it's okay. I confess. I will confess right now publicly that as a student, I did my best not to read as well.
Yep.
If I could go to class and the instructor would tell me everything it is I needed to know, and I could then go and take the test, and I might miss a couple questions that were based solely on the textbook that I did not read, but I had pretty good test taking skills, so I could probably guess pretty well on a bunch of those. Yeah, I didn't need to read. It was all about how to best manage my own time. So I completely get students who choose not to read. And invariably what happens is exactly what you experience, is you tell students to read and they don't read. And so therefore you feel compelled to tell them everything that's in the chapter. So for those handful of students that did read, what they've just learned is they don't need to read, because you're going to tell them everything that's in the chapter anyway. So if we're going to do that, then what's the purpose of textbooks?
Yeah. And you're going to talk to them about all those things on fast forward, because how could you ever take a deep dive into anything in, for example, like a survey course or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And for every instructor who moves from lecturing all the time to a hybrid course, that is the biggest thing that they struggle with. Let me rephrase that. For many instructors who move to a hybrid format, that's one of the biggest things that they struggle with, because they're trying to cover all the content now in, say, half the time or 40% of the time, and you just can't do it.
Yeah, I've just been in meetings with colleagues today. You and I are just a couple weeks into the quarter, and I've just been in meetings with colleagues who are new to the remote teaching thing and are killing themselves because they haven't broken out of the box of being in the classroom, having all that class time, and thinking it necessary to make sure that they cover everything. And you know what? And I am not in any way putting them down for that, because I think it is this challenge of I need to reach these outcomes. I need to figure out if I need to address these student outcomes. I need to assess these student outcomes to see if my students are learning anything. And this is the one way that was maybe given to me at some point in time, and that I've relied on for a decade or 2 decades or whatever it is. So a couple of years ago, I talked to you. We always talk about teaching, and I said, "What are you doing in your course?" As we would often catch up, kind of with that question to start. And you said, "Well, I'm not doing multiple choice exams anymore." So how did that switch happen for you?
Well, 2 things happened. One is I read an article in the APS Observer, I think it was written by Brian Seville, on strategies for interteaching. And I read that with great interest, and I thought, I don't know if I'm ready to do that. I don't know. And then Eric Landrum and I kept showing up at the same conferences, and it took me about 4 or 5 times of hearing his particular talk where he mentions that the one skill that employers are not looking for out of their new college graduates is how to take multiple choice tests. And I heard that the first time, and it really struck a chord with me. And then I heard it the second time, and the third. And I swear it was at least 4 times that I heard this before I finally said, it's time to do something different. And what finally the straw that broke the camel's back was I was spending a lot of time one evening trying to figure out a better way to explain some concept. And I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I thought, I am spending way more time thinking about this course content than my students are. And everything that we know about learning says it should be the other way around, that the students should be spending their time thinking about the course content. That's how we learn. So it was those 3 things, I would say, that all came together in a perfect storm that caused me to say, you know what, that's it. Let's just do it.
Well, and then eventually you wrote a Monitor article, and it was about interteaching, and it started with this this story, which is I realized that I was working harder than my students in this way, and it's interesting to hear you talk about all these things because not doing multiple choice exams is related to course design, is related to how you tackle the content in your course. It's related to how you spend your time and what you ask your students to do. So it's not just, well, I'm going to give multiple choice tests or not give multiple choice tests. I think, and I wonder if one of the reasons you didn't listen to Eric the first or second time, or yourself identifying with what he was saying, was we know what it takes to make even that small decision. I'm going to make I'm going to make a shift in assessment in my course, and that can just throw you into an overhaul of your whole entire course. So did you feel like you had to overhaul your course when you were making this decision, or were you set up for it?
It's an interesting question. What I largely did was take the examples that I was using in my lectures, and I just flipped them around into questions that students could answer. So I feel like we should talk a little bit now about what we're talking about. Yep. So for interteaching, you give students a set of questions in advance. The students answer the questions, and then they come to class prepared to discuss those answers. And there are a number of ways that instructors can manage all of that. And for me, I've essentially turned the questions into a take-home test. So we can think of them as take-home essay tests, except I'm giving students, say, 10 to 15 questions each week over the chapter, and then I'm going to grade just a couple of them, but students don't know which couple I'm going to grade. But through students answering these questions in advance and then coming to class and discussing them and then telling me, these are the questions that our group had a really hard time with. Can you talk more about these concepts? And that way, we're really just focused on the content that students are having a hard time with, and not the concepts that I think students are having a hard time with. Yeah.
And so at that point, when you do that final assessment, and I mean, that's the measurement of the learning in this process. And so there's no reason at that point for another exam. I always thought of the multiple choice exam as, the kind of the king or queen of examination. Like, this is actually, okay, you can do all that stuff. That's just assignments. But really what we need is a multiple choice exam to figure out if students are getting this. And you know what? Multiple choice exams give quick data, and they do a lot of good stuff. So,
I don't want to completely rag on multiple choice exams. Anybody who is teaching a large lecture course, for instance, I don't know that you have a whole lot of other options. When I made that switch, I wasn't ready to give up the multiple choice exams. So I completely restructured how my lectures were organized in a way in that I gave the students the questions, they answered the questions, they came, they discussed, they told me what they wanted me to cover, I covered it. And just as a little sneaky thing here, when I mention this to instructors, they kind of freak out a little bit at the idea that they don't know what they're going to be lecturing on. Well, if the students say they're having a hard time with this, then I got to talk about that. Well, yeah, but remember that as the instructor, you're the one who's written all these questions. So if there's something you don't want to talk about, don't ask a question about it.
Totally.
So when I started doing this, I kept the multiple choice the multiple choice tests. I did. And what I found was that there was a very strong correlation between how students did on the multiple choice questions and how they did on the essay questions. So why do I keep doing the multiple choice tests? And the reason I wanted to give up the multiple choice test is because of Eric's point that employers really want their college graduates to have strong writing skills and strong analytical skills and strong application skills. And so I'm in a position, I teach relatively small classes compared to some colleagues. So there's no reason for me not to do the essays. And the multiple choice questions weren't adding anything to it. Well,
and I love that you used a little bit of like your own classroom research to make that determination. So that's nice because it's kind of data informed. The multiple choice examination or multiple choice questions in general, I think are a fine thing. But what I hear you saying is there was no point, or there's very little point to doing them. It was essentially just kind of replicating your assessment anyway. Now, we know that multiple choice testing is good. Retrieval practice is good. But one of the things I find interesting is that when you have high stakes multiple choice exams, you're going to get, we all know learning. I think we all, if we teach general psych, we teach the learning chapter that we're going to get this spike in studying behavior right before the exam, which is not the best kind of learning. And maybe we should call these conversations like pro interteaching or something like that. But one of the things that my students just don't get is that the learning is built into interteaching. So it's spaced practice. They get multiple exposures to the reading. I actually do multiple choice tests as retrieval practice during the textbook reading. And that's how I make sure that they're reading in preparation for those take-home essay questions. But I love that the learning is built in. They can't avoid it. And it's all lower stakes than it would be in my old model. So I'm a big fan of it. Anything else you want to, and by the way, we know that there are so many variations on multiple choice questions. There are some really cool things that you can do with them. But would you agree with me that if you don't have to, because of demands of your 300 person class or something like that there might be better alternatives for assessment than multiple choice tests?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Especially, so what you need to do is you need to get Eric Landrum to record the one skill that no employer wants, that all college students become very good at, is how to take multiple choice tests. So you record that and then you listen to it 4 times, space it out. Ideally over a few months to make sure that it really gets embedded in your brain. And then it becomes easier to let them go.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing worth noting here is that I casually dropped in there that I have my students answer these 10 to 15 questions, but I only score 2. And so many instructors want to score all of them. And so many students want you to score all of them, but you don't have to. It's the same with multiple choice tests. Your multiple choice questions, you're not asking a question about every itty bitty piece of content in the chapter. You're sampling, and it's the same thing here.
Yeah, so it can save you some time. And I think in my experience, and I know yours is the same, students actually accept it and they get it. And if a student comes to you, Sue, I'm going to set you up. You ready to knock it out? If a student comes to you and say, why don't you grade everything that I am doing? I really wish you would give me feedback on everything. Your answer is?
It's just like being working retail. So your manager may occasionally listen in on a couple interactions that you have with customers, and The expectation is that you're going to have a positive experience with every customer. And so therefore your manager is going to trust to just sample. And I am doing exactly the same thing. You don't want a manager looking over your shoulder the entire time. I am trusting that you are learning through answering these questions. So I'm going to sample. But keep in mind that you've got these questions at the beginning, you got your textbook through class discussion, whether it be online or face-to-face or remote. You got your peers in the classroom to help you answer these questions. You've got my lectures to help you answer these questions. Anything that you're still unsure about, you can contact me personally, just like you would contact your boss. It's like if you had something that you were doing in your job and you didn't know how to do it, you don't get to just say, beats me, and you just don't do it. Instead, you go to whoever your supervisor, you start with your coworkers, but then you go to your supervisor and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. So, yeah. So it's all about learning. And one of the things I really love about taking 2 questions out of all those questions is that students can't skip a question. They can't just say, I don't understand this classical conditioning stuff, so I'm just going to hope there aren't any questions on the exam about it. I'm just going to skip it. I'm not going to do it. No. The content that I have laid out in the course through these questions it's important stuff, I think. So therefore, figure it out. But you've got all these resources to help you figure it out. You don't just get to skip it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Sue, for talking about exams with me, and I guess we'll probably do this again soon.
I hope so, Garth. Always a fun time.
So this quarter, I am trying something a little different. We've got the 7 integrative themes from APA, IPI, and so in the revision, 2 questions that I'm grading. And they can choose a path. So they can choose the essentially it's the 75% path, or it is the 100% path. And the 100% path, which I say exceeds standard. This is just for the revision, right? So I have them think about all of the interteaching cycle as a 1-week cycle. So if there's 100 points in the cycle, this is really only, 50 of those points or something like that. But so for that, if they choose that, choose their own adventure for the full points, they're just going to, they need to have the questions revised and correct. And then they need to tag on a little, a couple sentences at the end. And I call them, I call it metacognition, just reflecting on the integrative themes. And they need to choose one integrative theme and tie it to their answer, how they answered the question. So, yeah, I don't know how I came up with it, gave them a couple examples. But I don't know. What do you think?
I am really interested to hear how your students do with that, because I've been trying to figure out the best way to incorporate those integrative themes. Yep. I think the biggest thing that came out of APA, the biggest thing that's going to come out of APA, IPI are those integrative themes. Yeah. It's really the first time that we've even come close in intro psych to agreeing on anything that looks like content. Yeah. And if all of our intro psych students can come away knowing those integrative themes, we are way ahead of the game. So I've been thinking a lot too about how best to incorporate them. And I'm thinking, well, is there just a question per chapter? I really like what you're doing with that. So I will certainly be very interested to hear what students do with it. I was thinking of maybe incorporating it into part of the group discussion. So for the online group discussion, my online group discussions are very prescriptive. So I could have, here are the 7 integrative themes, and one part of the group discussion is pick one of these themes as you think it applies to this particular chapter and write something about that.
Yeah. And it really, it's, in your case, it would be, you'd be asking all your students to do that. Now, and in my case, it's kind of an optional thing. What I think my students, what I learned from them in week 1, when some really sharp students who were looking ahead were saying, wait a second. They were saying, okay, what are these things? Can I get some more information about what they are? And what I realized is that we didn't have a document that, like, in a few sentences tells us what it means that, one of the integrative things, that perception is subjective or whatever. And so, so I pulled that and kind of presented it to them. Yeah. So I think for it to be usable, students need more than just the one-liner of this integrative theme, because those, and what I realized that I didn't know ahead of time is those are very instructor focused integrative themes and not very student focused without some context, because they have to be taught.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some of the textbooks that have themes, that talk about themes, they talk about them in the very first chapter and introduce them and then revisit them throughout the textbook. And I'm certain that as we start to look at textbooks that come out in their new editions, as they start to roll out, they're going to be incorporating those integrative themes. So it's going to be easier for students to see what they are. But initially, I'm just trying to figure out how to introduce them, and writing up a document that is student friendly would be a way to do that. And then do you just deliver them all at one time, or do a 2 or 3 in one chapter, 2 or 3 in the next chapter, and then hammer them throughout the rest of the course? I don't know.
Well, the nice thing about the interteaching cycle that we follow is that you could, once you put it into the cycle, you can hit it 10 times in a quarter, which we teach quarters, right? So even if they're not getting it the first week, you can, by the 10th week of doing it, they're going to have, with a little feedback, they're going to have a much better idea of how to do that. So I'm actually seeing it as a skill that they're going to build throughout the course as well. That's the intention. So we'll see. I'll follow up with you about it, and maybe we can piece this little side conversation together with that next conversation when I see what's going to happen here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I look forward to that conversation.
Yeah, should be good. And then we might, and maybe we should just clip it together with a little conversation about the integrative themes. So maybe we should do that. That'd be good. Yeah,
because we're just rattling off about integrative themes here, and as if people know what we're talking about.
All right, IPI.org. Nope. APA.org/IPI to see what those integrated themes are. And those will be published probably sometime next year, next summer or something like that, with a little more context. So, all right, signing off.